My name is Cora Hayes. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I've moved through the world like a gentle current, quiet and steady, flowing around the more prominent features of my family's landscape. I learned early on that my role was to be the dependable one, the safe harbor, the quiet background against which my younger sister's vibrant, chaotic life could be painted in brilliant, dramatic colors. We grew up in a modest split-level house in the suburb of Cedar Creek, Oregon, a city perpetually washed clean by rain, where the air smells of damp earth and pine. Our home was a testament to my sister Serena's ever-shifting passions. Her lopsided pottery vases held wilting grocery store flowers on the mantelpiece. Her abstract paintings, full of bold, angry slashes of color, hung crookedly in the hallway. My own achievements, spelling bee trophies, honor roll certificates, were tucked away in a box in my closet, acknowledged with a brief, "That's lovely, dear," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Serena. "Did you see the new sculpture Serena is working on? She has such a gift." The disparity wasn't born of malice, I don't think. My parents, practical people who had worked hard for their modest comfort, were simply captivated by Serena. She was the artist, the free spirit, the one who felt things so deeply the rest of us couldn't help but be pulled into her emotional orbit. When she wanted to take up photography at 16, they bought her a top-of-the-line camera and darkroom equipment. When I, at the same age, needed a new computer for my advanced coursework, I spent the summer scooping ice cream to save up for it. The pattern was set. Serena's dreams were investments, my needs were my own responsibilities. She drifted through her 20s on a cloud of parental support, flitting from one creative venture to another, jewelry making, then custom-designed clothing, then an ill-fated Etsy shop selling artisanal candles that smelled vaguely of burnt herbs. Each endeavor began with a passionate flurry and ended with debt and disillusionment, which my parents would quietly absorb. Meanwhile, I had worked my way through college on a combination of scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating with a degree in environmental science and a significant student loan burden. By 34, I had carved out a life that was small but entirely my own. I worked as a data analyst for a local environmental nonprofit, a job that suited my quiet, meticulous nature. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in an older brick building, with a large window that overlooked a street lined with mossy maple trees. I found a deep, abiding contentment in small rituals, the first sip of strong coffee in the morning, the rhythmic drumming of rain on the glass, the quiet companionship of a good book. I wasn't wealthy or glamorous, and the shadow of my student loans was a constant, low-grade hum in the back of my mind, but I was self-sufficient. I was proud of that. The day my life tilted on its axis began like any other drizzly Tuesday in the Pacific Northwest. On my way home from work, I stopped at a small neighborhood market for a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. A brightly colored sign taped to the door announced the state lottery jackpot had climbed to an astonishing $4.8 million. I rarely, if ever, played. It seemed like a tax on wishful thinking. But that day, something compelled me, a flicker of whimsy, a quiet, internal whisper of what if. "Just one, please," I said to the cashier, pushing a few crumpled dollars across the counter. "You never know," he said with a practiced smile. "Someone's gotta win it." I tucked the small slip of paper into my wallet and thought nothing more of it. That evening, curled on my sofa with a book and a cup of tea, the sound of a steady downpour a soothing rhythm against the windowpane, I remembered the ticket. More out of idle curiosity than genuine hope, I pulled up the lottery website on my laptop. I smoothed the ticket out on the coffee table, comparing the numbers one by one. The first number matched. A small, unremarkable coincidence. The second. My posture straightened slightly. The third. My heart gave a little lurch, a sudden, sharp thud against my ribs. I leaned closer to the screen. Fourth number. Fifth. By the time I saw the sixth and final number glowing on the screen, identical to the last one on my ticket, the world seemed to fall silent. The rain, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, it all faded away, replaced by the roaring in my ears. I stared at the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen. It had to be a mistake. I must have been looking at last week's numbers, or misremembering what I'd bought. But I checked again, and then a third time. There was no mistake. I sat in stunned silence for a long time, the book forgotten in my lap. My hands began to tremble. I carefully took a photo of the ticket with my phone, then slipped the original into the pages of my favorite book of Mary Oliver poems and placed it back on the shelf. It felt like the safest place in the world. With shaking fingers, I dialed my best friend, Chloe. "You need to come over," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Something's happened." Chloe arrived 20 minutes later, her face etched with concern. "Cora? What's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost." Wordlessly, I handed her my phone with the photo of the ticket and pointed to the laptop screen, still displaying the winning numbers. She looked from one to the other, her eyes widening. "No," she breathed. "No way. Is this real? Can you check again?" I pleaded, my voice small. "I think I might be hallucinating." She pulled out her own phone, her fingers flying across the screen. After a moment, she looked up at me, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It's real, Cora. Oh my God, it's real. You just won $4.8 million. That night was a surreal blur of emotions, disbelief giving way to giddy excitement, which was quickly tempered by a profound, terrifying sense of the unknown. Chloe stayed over, and we talked until the gray light of dawn began to filter through the window, our voices hushed as we whispered about the monumental shift that had just occurred. For the first time, I could imagine a life without the crushing weight of debt. I could buy a small house, a cottage with a garden where I could grow roses and herbs. I could travel, I could donate a meaningful sum to the non-profit I worked for, I could finally, truly breathe. My life had been irrevocably altered by a single, impulsive decision, but I had no inkling of how it would also strip away the gentle illusions I had built around my own family, revealing the stark, painful truths that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The lottery officials were kind, professional, and full of practical advice. "A windfall of this size can be a blessing, but it can also be a burden," a gentle woman named Ms. Reynolds explained as she guided me through the initial paperwork. "Consider very carefully who you tell and when. Money changes things, Cora. It changes relationships." I nodded, absorbing her words, but a part of me felt they didn't apply to my family. Despite the imbalances, despite the years of feeling secondary, I still held on to a naive belief in the fundamental goodness of our bond. They were my parents, Serena was my sister. How could they not be happy for me? There was also a small, shameful part of me that yearned for their approval, that wanted them to see this incredible stroke of luck as an achievement, a validation. Perhaps this, finally, would be the thing that made them truly see me. After days of deliberation, I decided to tell them during our standing Sunday dinner, a monthly ritual I upheld more out of duty than desire. I drove to my parents' house, the familiar route feeling strange and new, as if I were seeing it through a different lens. The house was exactly as I remembered, filled with the comfortable clutter of my parents' lives and the ever-present monuments to Serena's artistry. The air smelled of my mother's pot roast and something faintly of turpentine from Serena's latest project in the garage. "You seem bright today, Cora," my mother observed as I helped her set the table. "Did you get a promotion at work?" "Something like that," I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. "Let's wait for everyone to get here." When we were all seated around the familiar oak dining table, I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have some news," I began. "Something wonderful and completely unexpected has happened." My parents looked at me with mild curiosity. Serena, who had arrived 20 minutes late with a dramatic sigh about a creative block, was scrolling through her phone. I won the lottery." The statement hung in the air for a moment. My father chuckled. "The lottery? What, $50 on a scratch-off?" "No," I said, my voice steadier now. "The state lottery. The jackpot." It's $4.8 million. Silence. Serena's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes wide. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Cora, she whispered, are you serious? I nodded, a real, genuine smile finally breaking through my nervousness. The initial reaction was everything I had hoped for. There were exclamations of shock, of joy. My father let out a low whistle, and my mother actually got up and hugged me, a rare and slightly awkward display of affection. For a glorious minute, I felt the warmth of their unadulterated happiness for me. And then, as if on cue, the conversation shifted. Oh, my goodness, my mother said, her eyes finding Serena's across the table. Serena, honey, this is the answer to our prayers. A knot of familiar disappointment tightened in my stomach. Serena's expression morphed from surprise to a dawning, calculated excitement. She gave me a hug that felt more possessive than celebratory. Oh my God, Cora! This is amazing. We can finally get me a proper studio space. The "we" hung in the air, heavy and presumptuous. Well, now, hold on, I said, trying to keep my tone light. I haven't even received the money yet. There's a process, and I need to talk to a financial advisor. This is perfect timing, my father said, waving away my practicalities as if they were irrelevant gnats. He turned to Serena. Tell your sister about the bind you're in. Serena, to her credit, had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed. It's just, the lease on my current space is up, and I found the most perfect loft downtown, but the deposit is insane. And I'm still paying off the loan for the industrial loom I bought last year. The loom, I knew, had been sitting unused in their garage for 6 months after she'd abandoned her weaving phase. She's in debt up to her eyeballs, my father stated bluntly. Nearly $50,000, not to mention the new capital she needs for materials. But with this windfall, that's a drop in the bucket. Dad, please, Serena mumbled, before turning a bright, hopeful smile on me. But he's right, Cora. This could be my big break. I have a whole business plan for a line of hand-dyed textiles. It's different this time. I can feel it. I sat there, my food growing cold, as I watched my once-in-a-lifetime moment be co-opted and repurposed to serve my sister's latest whim. They hadn't asked me how I felt. They hadn't asked what I might want to do with my own money, what dreams I might have for my own future. It was simply assumed that my good fortune was a communal resource, one that would be primarily directed towards Serena. I have student loans, I said quietly. Over $60,000 of them. That was the first thing I was going to do. My father scoffed. Student loans? You'll be a multimillionaire. That's pocket change. Your sister's career is on the line. Don't be selfish, Cora, my mother added, her voice taking on that familiar, disappointed tone that always made me feel small and unreasonable. Serena has a real gift. You have a stable job. It's only right that you help her. And what about my big break? I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them, laced with years of suppressed resentment. For once, something incredible has happened to me. Can't it just be about me for 5 minutes? Serena's eyes filled with tears. I can't believe you're being like this, she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. If I won, I would share everything with you in a heartbeat. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. 3 years ago, when our grandmother had left Serena $15,000, she had spent it all on a 6-week inspirational journey through Southeast Asia, returning with a suitcase full of souvenirs and not so much as an offer to take me out to dinner. The rest of the meal was excruciating. My joy had curdled into a bitter mix of anger and disappointment. I drove home through the rain-slicked streets of Cedar Creek, the city lights blurring through my tears. This miraculous, life-altering event had, in the space of a single dinner, become just another chapter in the long, wearying story of my family's inequity. Back in the sanctuary of my apartment, I poured a large glass of wine and called Chloe. That bad? She asked, her voice full of sympathy. They've already spent it, I said, my voice breaking. They've already allocated my miracle to Serena's next failed business venture. Oh, Cora. I'm so sorry, she said gently. What are you going to do? I took a deep, steadying breath, the familiar quiet of my apartment wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. I'm going to do exactly what I planned to do, I said, a new and unfamiliar resolve hardening in my voice. I'm going to secure my own future. And I'm going to learn how to say no. I had no idea how fiercely that simple, two-letter word would be tested. The morning after the disastrous dinner, my phone began to ring at 7:15 a.m. It was my mother. I've been up all night thinking, she began, foregoing any pleasantries. I think you were just in shock yesterday. It's a lot to take in. But now that you've had a night to sleep on it, I'm sure you realize that helping your sister is the only right thing to do. I pinched the bridge of my nose, a headache already blooming behind my eyes. Mom, it's barely 7. I haven't even had coffee yet. Can we please not do this right now? What is there to do? It's family, Cora. We've always taught you girls to look out for each other. The statement was so devoid of irony it was almost funny. I have to get ready for work, I said, my voice flat. I'll talk to you later. I ended the call before she could reply, my hand trembling slightly. At work, I tried to focus on spreadsheets and data sets, but my mind was a whirlwind. During my lunch break, I saw a string of missed calls and a text from Serena. Hey Cora. So excited for us. I put together a more detailed business plan and a budget. It's about $120,000 to get everything off the ground properly. Let me know when you can look it over. Love you. The casual entitlement of it stole my breath. That afternoon, I met with the financial advisor the Lottery Commission had recommended, a sharp, composed woman in her 50s named Mrs. Davies. She laid out the reality of my winnings. After state and federal taxes, the lump sum payment would be closer to $2.6 million. Still a staggering, life-changing amount, but not the nearly $5 million my family had in their heads. The very first thing we do is pay off all high-interest debt, she said, her pen tapping a line item for my student loans. Then, a 6-month emergency fund. After that, we build a diversified, conservative portfolio for long-term security. The goal is to make this money last your entire life. When I tentatively mentioned my family's expectations, her expression tightened with a look of weary familiarity. This is the most common and the most difficult part of sudden wealth, Ms. Hayes. My advice is to be clear, firm, and early with your boundaries. Any gifts to family should be a one-time, well-documented event, not an open line of credit. You are not an emergency fund for other adults. I left her office feeling both empowered and terrified. I had a plan, a real, tangible path to a secure future. But it was a path that diverged sharply from the one my family had already mapped out for me. The assault continued that evening. My father left a stern voicemail. Your mother is deeply hurt by your coldness, Cora. This is not the daughter we raised. Call me back so we can sort this out like a family. The following day, I received a group text from my mother, addressed to me, my father, and Serena. Family meeting tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. at our house to discuss the family's financial future now that we've been so blessed. Cora, please bring all your lottery paperwork so we can get a clear picture. The audacity of it, to schedule a meeting about my money without even asking me, was staggering. My thumbs hovered over the screen before I typed a simple, firm reply, I will not be attending. My finances are my own responsibility, and I am handling them with a professional advisor. The response was an immediate, explosive chain reaction of angry calls and wounded texts. I silenced my phone and tried to breathe. A few days later, I went back to the lottery headquarters for the official press ceremony. I posed with the giant, novelty check, a stiff, awkward smile plastered on my face as cameras flashed. It felt entirely unreal, like I was watching an actor play a part. The officials gave me a smaller, commemorative copy of the check as a souvenir. I drove from their office to a new bank, where I opened a secure post office box. I deposited the commemorative check and copies of all my official documents there. The originals went into a safe deposit box. A strange paranoia had taken hold, a feeling that I needed to protect this new life from my own family. When I got home that evening, my stomach plummeted. My parents' Subaru was parked in the visitor spot outside my building. They were waiting on the bench by the front door, my mother clutching her purse, my father with his arms crossed, a thunderous look on his face. Serena was sitting in the car, staring at her phone. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I sighed, glancing around the quiet street. "Fine," I said, my voice weary. "But let's do it inside." The moment they stepped into my small apartment, the space seemed to shrink. The air grew thick with unspoken resentments. My mother surveyed my carefully curated collection of second-hand furniture and worn books with a faint air of disapproval. "This has gone on long enough, Cora," my father began, planting himself in the center of my living room rug like a conquering general. "It's time to stop this foolishness and act like a daughter. Your sister needs your help. We've worked out the numbers," my mother added, pulling a piece of paper from her purse. $120,000. That will clear Serena's debts and give her enough capital to run her business for a full year. It's a very reasonable request. I took a deep breath, clutching the calm, professional words of Mrs. Davies like a shield. I've made my decision. My first priority is securing my own future. That means paying off my student loans, buying a home for myself, and investing for my retirement. "Retirement," my father boomed. "You're 34 years old. You have millions of dollars. What on earth are you talking about?" "The money is not as much as you think after taxes," I said firmly. "And yes, I am thinking about retirement. It's called being responsible. Something I've had to be my entire life." Serena chose that moment to enter, having apparently been summoned by a text. She stood by the door, her arms wrapped around herself. "Cora, I don't understand why you're being so cruel. This is my dream. Don't you want me to be happy?" "Of course I want you to be happy, Serena," I said, and I meant it. "But I can't keep funding your dreams at the expense of my own. Not anymore." I brought up her past ventures, the loom, the candle making, the jewelry that was now tangled in a box in her childhood bedroom. "That's enough," my father snapped. "You will not speak to your sister that way. She has a gift, and it deserves to be nurtured." "And what about me?" I finally cried, the words raw and torn from a place deep inside me. "What about my gifts? What about my needs? Were they ever worth nurturing? Or was I just the sensible, boring one who was supposed to take care of herself so all the family's resources and attention could flow to her?" The ugly truth of it hung in the air, undeniable and suffocating. My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My father's face was a mask of fury. Serena just looked shocked, as if the thought had never, ever occurred to her. The argument raged for another hour, a toxic storm of guilt, manipulation, and anger. Finally, drained and shaking, I walked to the door and held it open. "You need to leave," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I've made my decision. It's not up for discussion anymore." My father's face hardened into something I had never seen before. "If this is the attitude you're going to take," he said, his voice dangerously low, "don't be surprised if you find yourself without a family to come home to." The threat struck me with the force of a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. "If your love is conditional on a six-figure payout," I replied, my voice gaining strength, "then maybe I don't have a family to begin with." After they were gone, the silence they left behind was vast and terrifying. I sank onto my sofa, the adrenaline draining away, leaving me hollow and exhausted. But beneath the exhaustion was a flicker of something else, a strange, fierce pride. I had stood my ground. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. I immediately called Chloe. I need to get out of here for a few days, I said. I don't trust them not to just show up again. My guest room is all yours, she said without hesitation. Pack a bag. I'll open the good wine. As I threw some clothes into an overnight bag, a chilling premonition washed over me. This wasn't over. They had been pushed back, but they would not give up. I had no idea how right I was, or how low they were willing to stoop. I spent 3 days in the peaceful haven of Chloe's apartment, a quiet island in the storm of my family's making. I went to work, came back to her cozy guest room, and did my best to ignore the barrage of calls and texts that ranged from tearful pleading to outright threats. I responded to only a few, with a simple, repeated message: I need space. My decision is final. On the 4th day, a Friday, I realized I'd left my passport at my apartment, which I needed for an upcoming work trip. Chloe was tied up in all-day meetings, but I assured her I'd be fine. I'll just run in and grab it during my lunch break, I told her. I'll be in and out in 5 minutes. The walk to my building was filled with a low-level dread. Everything looked normal from the outside. I unlocked the front door of the building and then the door to my apartment, a sick feeling twisting in my gut. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I wasn't alone. I could hear low voices from the living room, and the air was tinged with an acrid, chemical smell. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first instinct was to back out, run, and call the police. But a hot wave of anger, fierce and protective, washed over me. This was my home. My sanctuary. I strode into the living room, my fear incinerated by rage. What are you doing in here? I demanded. My parents stood frozen by my coffee table. Between them, nestled in the small metal wastebasket from my kitchen, a piece of thick, official-looking paper was smoldering, orange flames licking at its edges. With a jolt of ice-cold horror, I recognized the distinct logo of the state lottery. My mother was holding a barbecue lighter, a look of grim, righteous satisfaction on her face. My father turned to me, his expression as cold and hard as granite. If you won't share this blessing with your family, he said, his voice chillingly calm, then you won't have it at all. I stared at them, at the curling smoke, at the ashes of what they believed was my future. The violation was so profound, so utterly beyond the pale of anything I could have imagined, that my brain seemed to short-circuit. How had they gotten in? The spare key I'd given my mother 2 years ago when I had the flu, which I had foolishly never asked for back. The sheer, premeditated malice of it was breathtaking. And then, as the initial shock receded, a strange, hysterical bubble of absurdity rose in my chest. I started to laugh. It began as a low chuckle, then grew into a full-throated, tear-streaming peal of laughter that echoed in the tense silence of the room. My parents exchanged confused, alarmed glances. This was not the reaction they had anticipated. "What is so funny?" my mother demanded, her righteous expression faltering. "Do you think this is a joke?" I wiped the tears from my eyes, struggling to catch my breath. "Actually, yes," I choked out. "Yes, I do. This is the most pathetic, hilarious joke I've ever seen." "You've lost your mind," my father said, his confidence wavering. "No," I replied, my laughter finally subsiding into a wide, incredulous smile. "I've just found my clarity." "You really think that was the check?" Their confusion was now palpable. My mother glanced at the smoldering mess in the bin. "We saw the pictures of you holding it." "The big check." "That," I explained, my voice dripping with a calm I didn't know I possessed, "is a prop. A giant piece of cardboard for publicity photos. The Lottery Commission doesn't hand over millions of dollars on a piece of flammable paper you can burn in a trash can. The money is being transferred electronically, directly into a secure bank account." The color drained from my mother's face. My father's jaw went slack. He tried to recover, to bluster his way through. "You're lying. You're just saying that to." I didn't let him finish. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and turned the screen toward them. There, in black and white, was the official confirmation from the lottery's financial department, detailing the pending electronic funds transfer. "The money is safe," I said quietly. "And it is mine. What you just did was break into my home and commit arson on a souvenir." The silence that fell was absolute. They stood there, two burglars caught in the act, their grand, manipulative gesture revealed as nothing more than a desperate, foolish crime. Just then, the apartment door swung open and Serena walked in, carrying a paper bag from a nearby bakery. "I brought coffee and scones," she announced brightly, before stopping short at the scene before her. She looked from my face to our parents, her eyes widening at the tension in the room. "Oh. You're here." "They were just committing a felony," I said conversationally. "They broke in and tried to burn my lottery winnings." "What?" she gasped, looking genuinely shocked. "I didn't know they were going to do that. They just said they were going to wait for you, to talk to you again." Whether she was a co-conspirator or merely an ignorant accomplice didn't matter. The united front, the shared belief that they had a right to my life and my home, was the real crime. "All of you," I said, my voice low and steady, imbued with a finality that came from the very core of my being. "Get out. Now." "Cora, please," my mother began, her tone shifting to a desperate, wheedling plea. "We made a terrible mistake. We were just so worried about you, about the family." "No," I cut her off. "You were worried about your access to my money. There's a very big difference. After everything we've done for you," my father started, falling back on the old, tired refrain. "This," I said, gesturing around the room, at the lingering smell of smoke, at their guilty faces, "is what you've done for me. You've shown me exactly who you are. And I believe you." I walked to the door and held it open. They gathered their things, their movements jerky and uncertain. As Serena passed me, she paused, her face a mask of indignation. "You've changed, Cora," she whispered venomously. "This money has made you a cruel person." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, Serena," I replied, my voice quiet but unshakable. "It's given me the freedom to stop letting other people's cruelty define my life. Now, please leave my home." After they were gone, I leaned against the closed door, my body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. The second was to call Chloe. "You will not believe what they just did," I said, and as I recounted the story, I felt not sadness, but a profound, cleansing rage. The last, tattered vestiges of my illusions about my family had just gone up in smoke, right along with that worthless piece of cardboard. And in its place was a strange and unfamiliar freedom. I was finally, completely, on my own. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a beginning. A year can feel like a lifetime. 12 months after my family tried to burn my future in a wastebasket, I stood on the porch of my own small house, a cup of coffee warming my hands against the cool morning air of the Oregon coast. The sea mist was rolling in, blurring the line between the ocean and the sky, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and the roses I had planted in my garden. This place, this peace, was the real jackpot. The journey here had not been a straight line. It had been a winding, often painful path of untangling myself from a lifetime of unhealthy dynamics. The money, which had arrived in my bank account 2 days after the incident, was the tool that made it possible. With the calm guidance of Mrs. Davies, I paid off my student loans in one glorious, tear-filled keystroke. I quit my job, leaving a substantial anonymous donation to the nonprofit as a parting gift. And then I bought this house, a modest cedar-shingled cottage with big windows and a garden that begged for attention, and I moved 3 hours away from Cedar Creek, leaving no forwarding address for my immediate family. The first few months were a strange mix of liberation and grief. I grieved for the family I wished I had, the one that would have celebrated my good fortune without entitlement or manipulation. I saw a therapist, another investment in myself, who helped me understand that setting boundaries wasn't an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. You can love them from a distance, Cora, she told me. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. My Aunt June, my mother's younger sister, became my bridge back to the family, on my own terms. She had always been a quiet observer of our family's lopsided dynamics, and she reached out with an email a few weeks after my move. I heard your mother's version of events, she wrote. I have a feeling it's missing a few key details. I hope you're okay. Her validation was a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. We began to talk, first on the phone, then meeting for lunch halfway between our homes. She gave me news without pressure or judgment. I learned that my parents, true to form, had taken out a second mortgage on their house to pay off Serena's debts and fund yet another venture, this time, a curated lifestyle brand. The news filled me with a complex mix of pity and weary resignation. They were trapped in a cycle I had only just managed to escape. Meanwhile, I was discovering who I was without the constant weight of financial anxiety and family expectation. I volunteered at a local marine biology center, spent my afternoons pulling weeds and planting flowers in my garden, and took long, solitary walks on the beach. I used my resources not for lavish toys, but for quiet impact. I established a small, anonymous foundation that provided scholarships for first-generation college students in my home county, the kind of support I had so desperately needed myself. This, I discovered, brought me a satisfaction deeper and more lasting than any material possession could. About 8 months after I'd left, I received an email from Serena. It was short and, for the first time, devoid of drama or demands. Cora, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what happened, but for everything. My new business failed, just like you probably knew it would. Mom and Dad bailed me out again, and seeing the stress it put them under. I finally understood. I've been living in a fantasy world. I got a job. A real one. I'm a barista. It's not glamorous, but I'm paying my own rent for the first time in my life. I miss my sister. That's all. I read the email several times, searching for the familiar undertones of manipulation. But they weren't there. It felt real. After a week of careful thought, I replied. Thank you for your email, Serena. I'm glad to hear you're finding your way. I need more time, but I appreciate you reaching out. The door was not closed, but it was no longer wide open for anyone to walk through. The terms of entry had changed. This morning, standing on my porch, I felt a profound sense of peace. My relationship with my sister was a tentative sprout, uncertain if it would grow into something strong, but for the first time, rooted in honest ground. My connection with my parents remained a distant, silent space, a boundary I needed to maintain for my own well-being. Perhaps one day that, too, would change. Or perhaps it wouldn't. I was finally okay with that uncertainty. The lottery had given me financial freedom, but the true prize was the person it had forced me to become. It had stripped away my illusions and compelled me to build a life based on my own values, not on the assigned role I had played for so long. The greatest wealth, I had learned, was not the number in my bank account, but the quiet, unshakable knowledge of my own worth. It was the richness of a life lived authentically, the luxury of peace, and the freedom to be the sole author of my own story. And that was a prize beyond measure.